All right. Well, hello everyone. So what we're doing here, this is actually our first attempt trying out the live stream feature. So bear with me as we kind of figure out a few details here. And for instance, the live stream little caption there seemed to be a little bit in the way. So we'll get that out of the way there. So what we're doing here is we are presenting our QMS Boot Camp live. Oh, hang on a second here. Sorry, it looks like I've got Teams joined on it. So let me make sure I've got that closed out. Again, forgive me, folks. This is our first time trying this out. So we are kind of learning as we go here. All right. So I think we're actually ready now. So I wonder if we'll be able to edit any of those details out, but we're going to get started. So what we're talking about today is we're going through a QMS Bootcamp training. So what the QMS Bootcamp is this is a course that we've put together, honestly, something I've been working on for more than 10 years now, to get a real world concise training of what you need in the workplace to implement, maintain, and run your quality management system. So what we're going to be doing here over the next few weeks is we're going to be releasing segments of our QMS Bootcamp one at a time, just trying to get some good information out there that we know a lot of people need and are looking for. And again, since I am trying this out for the first time here, pardon me for grabbing the phone, but I'm checking to see how the audio is. So let's see. Anyone that's on there, can y'all tell me how this audio is going? Let's see what that does. Waiting. Maybe not. All right. Alrighty, so let's dive into it. What we're talking about today is terminology. Have you ever been in an argument or a debate with someone and someone said, "You don't understand, that's not what I meant"? Well, unfortunately, these things are not relegated strictly to arguments and discussions in our personal lives. These things occur quite frequently in the workplace as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to be taking a look at some of the slides, a little bit of kind of generic information about quality management. And I'll be honest with you, today's is not the most thrilling of an episode, but it's great fundamental information that you have to have if you're going to run a management system. So let's dive into it with a little more detail here. So yeah, we're talking about terminology. Yes, again, like I say, it's kind of long and boring, but unfortunately, ISO is so much about word choice. Quality management is so much about word choice. And like it, dislike it, agree, disagree, ISO 9001 does lay the groundwork for much of the quality management world and the terminology that we use within it. So you'll see that we're going to be grabbing straight from ISO 9001 for a lot of these terms. And again, I am not most prepared today. Markers, all important, because the chart paper is one of my favorite friends in these processes. So we'll be taking a look here. Whew, again, sorry, a little bit of a mess. First time we're doing this. All right, so let's dig into talking about terminology here. So lots of keywords. Again, I know this isn't the most thrilling, but this is so incredibly important if you're going to survive and thrive with your quality management system, especially in times like they are today. The fact is we just don't have time for the back and forth and sometimes goofy rhetoric that we find ourselves caught in. So let's talk about these terminologies. We're taking here, again, straight from the ISO 9000. No, this is not 9001. The ISO 9000 is kind of just all about the vocabulary and the fundamentals of the 9000 series of standards. So the first one that we have here is top management. So we're going to go ahead and jot some of these terms down here. Top management is a very critical term for us. So what top management is, this is the, as ISO states, the person or group that controls an organization. So I'm gonna bet if you're listening to this video, you're probably the quality manager, health and safety manager, environmental manager, some combination of the two, maybe production involved. We are likely not going to be the top management of the organization. But ISO and quality management, especially if you listen to the Quality Matters podcast, you know, is critical about the importance of top management's involvement in the system. So if you are developing a management system from scratch, implementing it in your team, getting top management involved is so key, so critical. And there's lots of ways we can do this, and I'll be happy to talk with anyone one-on-one for some advice here. But you have to get the information in a presentable, clear and concise manner to your management team. Like it or not, we're all in sales, and you're oftentimes selling these great ideas to your management team so that they can then pursue the goals that they're trying to pursue already within the organization. So another one here is a quality management system consultant. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to write QMS here. The quality management consultant is someone like what we are with Texas Quality Assurance, is we come in to consult, to advise, to give you help and suggestions with implementing and managing your management system. So a key term is what they call quality management system realization. You'll find we're going to have a very similar term called product and service realization. So this is the process of taking the idea from an idea to an executable plan. The consultant's role is really just for advice and information. So you do want to have some limits as to how involved a consultant is in your organization. It's not uncommon, and we provide the same service as well through our Quality Assurance Monthly, that you may have a consultant very actively engaged in the organization early on, conducting meetings, conducting trainings, planning events, writing procedures, writing work instructions. But it's very critical that that get phased out over time for your organization to be successful. Now, it doesn't mean that you relegate the consultant to strictly the advisory role, but it does mean that over the course of 6 to 12 months, you need to be able to run and manage your own management system. Some standards, such as API, will not even allow your consultant to be on site during the day of an audit. Now, you can step aside and call a consultant, but it's still frowned upon in those audits. You need to be able to run on your own 2 feet to manage your own management system. Next, very broad, general, yet key term. Organization. Now, this doesn't mean getting yourself organized, something clearly I wasn't properly completed with before we started this live stream today. But you got to get your organization ready. What that means is organization. They've got a lot of bullet points here. Just copied and pasted here from the ISO standards so that you can have the information in front of you. But it's the first note they have here is really a person or group of persons that has its own functions with responsibilities, authorities, and relationships. Okay, that is the best answer, but it's not the best to understand and to make sense of. So really, an organization is whatever your team is. So in our case, we are a consulting organization. We can do auditing, consulting, training, and so forth. However, your organization could be a charitable organization, be a law enforcement entity. It could be a department within a larger organization, but you have to define your organization. Then when you define that organization, some key points that we talk about here are identifying functions, responsibilities, and authorities, because these are the tools that we're going to use to actually accomplish the work and actually get things done in the workplace. The next one here is context of the organization. This one Confuses folks a lot. Context of the organization is oftentimes its own entire standalone process in an audit. And when we say words like context of the organization, it gets people's heads spinning. And even for us that live and breathe this world, it can be very confusing and it can get our head spinning as well sometimes. So let's break down a little bit what context of the organization is. And there's a lot included in it. For kind of a fluff word that's thrown into the standard, has a lot of value. So this is the combination of our internal and external issues that can have an impact on the organization. So internal, external issues, again, those are just kind of fluff words that are thrown up, but they have real key meaning. So we can't just gloss over these and say it's not important. It is actually critical to the proper implementation of a management system. So internal, external issues. These are oftentimes customer requirements, internal requirements, management requirements, even personnel differences, the way that your departments interact with one another. We work with some organizations where the sales team is heavily involved in the design and development process. Others where the sales team doesn't find out about any of the design and development activity until months after it's been validated and then gets sent to them and told to sell. So just giving a short contrast to ways that teams operate. These are some of your internal and external issues. This is used for developing activities and its objectives. So in the quality management system, we have our quality policy, which we'll have a whole other video on. Quality policies are also very critical and oftentimes glossed over and honestly just made to be a bunch of fluff and, for lack of a better term, BS in some organizations. So we'll focus on that later, but what we're going to talk about here is your objectives. These are key measurables that you're going to check minimum once a year, recommended much more frequently than that, quarterly, if not monthly, and in some cases even weekly, such as customer satisfaction. How are you going to rate your customer satisfaction? Productivity rates, lost time rates, scrap rates. These are all great measures to take a look at, and you can set clear objectives in reference to them. So it also talks here about the behavior towards your interested parties. So interested parties is another one of these terms that showed up in the ISO 9001 2015 edition of the standard, and it really kind of confuses a lot of folks as well. So we're going to break it down a little bit further. Bear in mind, all of this is still within our friend context of the organization. Interested parties. These could be stakeholders in your organization. These could be the local neighborhood or local environment that you operate. I talk about this often. We had one client who had an abrasive blasting booth that was simply too noisy, and there was a neighborhood maybe a half mile beyond the woods behind their facility. And the noise levels in their neighborhood was above the local ordinance for noise levels. So they had to make some pretty drastic changes to get those under control. So interested parties have to be accounted here. So when we talk about the context of the organization, this is a lot more than, well, what's our policy? What are our objectives? This is who internally do we need to be concerned about? Who externally do we need to be concerned about? What are our customer needs? All these various factors play into it. So it's not something to be taken lightly. And I, for one, am often guilty of just glancing through the first few pages of a standard. I'll often read a book without reading the forward to the book. But really encourage you here, if you're jumping into quality management or looking to make some improvements this year, dig into the ISO 9000 2015 and really study that vocabulary. It's actually quite critical. We talked a little bit here already. So we've got our interested party. Hanging in. It's not so complicated as it sounds. This is someone that is affected by what you do. And one of the big buzzwords these days is ESG. We're looking for environmental sustainability and governance. So really seems that the whole ESG mantra and idea is really in regards to these interested parties. Who are our interested parties? What impact do we have on our greater environment? And you might say, well, it really doesn't matter a whole lot for me. But when folks come knocking on your door because perhaps some of the ways that you've been disposing is not being disposed of in a proper manner, and you're facing fines and all sorts of problems there. Perhaps the way you're perceived in the local community, the way you're perceived in the industry or marketplace is not so well. These things matter exponentially more today than they did even 5 years ago. The fact that I am here talking to you live in person across the entirety of the internet, and you're getting all of this information live, and you can catch up with it at any time you like, is evidence of how important our perception and how important the way we care for those that we affect is today. The world has changed and is changing, and interested parties is going to be huge in maintaining your good standing with your existing customers in your community, as you should. Customer, another odd term. You would think that a customer is a straightforward term, but you might be wrong there. Let's talk about law enforcement. We've talked for some time about trying to get involved in law enforcement, education, and these public sector areas. So tell me, for a police officer, for a law enforcement agency, who's the customer? Who's the interested party? Who's the supplier? These terms suddenly get a little fuzzy. So it depends on your particular department. So if you're in a records keeping department, your customer could be the legal entities that you send everything up to. But on the other hand, you're an officer on the street. Well, your customer is now the people that are in front of you. But then what's our product? So these terms can get a little confusing. So it is something that you have to really sit down and understand. It's one thing to just say, we have customer requirements, but it's really nailed down very specifically. Who is your customer? What does it take to ensure they're satisfied? What are the needs that they have? What are the needs that you're fulfilling? How do you ensure that you fulfill those properly? Now, again, we can go into many discussions digging into the details here, but these are some really good things to think about and to consider. And the standard here, I'm often a critic of it, but the standard here really does do a good job of getting some useful information across. Provider and external provider. So it looks like I might need some more room here. So we've got provider, external provider. Again, seems like a kind of a little silliness in the distinction here, but again, these things often are critical. So if we take a look at the idea of a provider, we often call these suppliers. So you'll hear some of these terms exchanged quite often. You can have internal suppliers as well as external suppliers. The example of a law enforcement agency, police department is a great example. They have many internal suppliers to handle their processes. The same is true in your organization. You have many internal suppliers to get what you need, and many internal providers. You also have external providers. So we need to make sure that we pay special attention to our external suppliers, because this is what we typically reference as our suppliers. You're going to have to approve these. You're going to have to identify criteria for them, what's critical, what's non-critical. There's really a lot that goes into managing your external suppliers, which we will also get into in some later videos. Quality management, another common term here. So quality management, well, that's kind of everything we're talking about here. But what's so special about quality management? So we really need to break this down and get into more words. It's talking about quality, it's talking about management. So we all have kind of our own idea of quality. What makes something quality? There's a lot of different people answer this differently. So, when we talk about we do quality management system consultation, what we actually mean is we provide a high quality management system for your organization. So my personal definition I like to use for quality is stating what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, and how you plan to accomplish that task. So if you can do all those and then measure yourself against it, you've got a quality product. ISO defines it here as quality management can include establishing quality policies, objectives, and processes to achieve these. A little more verbose, but it's the same idea. So if you're going to have good quality management, you have become very good and very skilled at identifying your needs, at identifying what you're going to do, and developing not only plans to accomplish them, but measures such as objectives of how you're going to measure them to determine their success and effectiveness. Swear we're almost done with the terms here, I swear. So quality planning. It's kind of what we've, again, already been talking about here. We've got quality management, which includes planning, assurance, and control. So we have quality management, quality planning, quality assurance, quality control. Very, very similar in nature. These are quality planning, quality assurance, quality control are all aspects of our quality management system. So without planning, without checking quality assurance, without taking action, without checking quality control, without taking action quality assurance, we don't have a process. So that's our next term here, process. Again, if you've listened to the Quality Matters podcast, you have heard me talk at end and at long length about the value of a process. So process really just how do these various pieces of our organization connect? What are our inputs and outputs? What are our controls? These are things that we would check in quality control. These are things that we would define in our quality assurance process. These are needs we would identify need controlled in our quality planning process. So process is the tool to achieve quality management. We've discussed policy already, quality policy to some degree, and these really aren't that difficult to understand. A policy is a general rule or kind of guideline, interpretations of how you're going to get things done. So ISO states that here is the intentions and direction of an organization formally expressed at its top. Again, we started with top management. Here we are at the end of our definitions, and we're back to the integration of top management again. Quality policy is a policy, but stating the needs of your quality management system. And these could be, I'm not going to say in contrast to, but different from, say, policies for a sales department, policies for engineering department. There are going to be some common aspects across all of these, but the focus is slightly different where you go. Requirement, not any shortage of importance on the term requirement, but I do feel that we might understand this one better than something such as context of the organization. Even the term customer can be a little confusing, but a requirement, these come from all sorts of places. Some requirements are generally implied. You might know a term for this. It's called common sense. So generally implied is these are common practical things that just the average reasonable man would not break. Interested parties have requirements. We find these all over the place, such as our EPA, TCEQ, OSHA requirements. These are all interested parties to our organization. We find that this is in our city ordinances, such a simple thing as the office complex that we're in right now. If we were to put a sign on the front of the building, I have to apply for a sign permit so that the city can approve my sign before it goes up. I then have to get permission from the building management to put the sign out there. And while this may seem a bit of a silly example, I do find that sometimes silly examples demonstrate things best. But for something as simple as putting a sign into the front of my business means that I have certain interested parties whose requirements must be met. And unfortunately, there are often consequences intended or unattended for not meeting your interested parties' requirements, taking us back to the whole ESG notion that we've been talking about already. Quality management, we obviously define lots of requirements. Unfortunately, that gives our profession sometimes a little bit of a bad taste in folks' mouths, because when times are good, we still pile on the requirements rather than seeking continual improvement, a whole other term and buzzword that we'll get to in a later video. So requirements can go on and on. I won't belabor this too much. The last point here is the most common requirement you're probably accustomed to is your customer requirements. They want a material of X dimensions, of X material, and they want it by such and such date. These are all key requirements that you must monitor. Give me a moment here. Looks like we got someone with a comment. Okay, never mind. All right. Nonconformity, conformity, defect. Again, very, very common terms. Not even going to put them up here. We can pull out another sheet, but these are ones that I feel we really well understand. A nonconformity is we didn't meet a requirement. Whatever type of requirement was, it's a nonconformity. So you'll hear us talk a lot of times about documenting things as a nonconformance report, a nonconformance report, nonconformance report. We use the term nonconformance report pretty frequently as opposed to a nonconforming material report or some other term, because anything that does not meet a requirement ought to be documented and ought to be documented regularly and reviewed regularly for trends. Defect is getting a little more specific. This would be the example of a non-conforming material. Is something with our production process was not the way it should be. This is a very specific type of non-conformity. Conformity, on the other hand, means we fulfilled our requirement. So any fulfillment of any requirement is conformity. Objective, we have discussed, so we'll move on. Output. This is any result of any process. So say, for instance, you have a sales process. What do you think the output to your sales process is? It's going to be sales. If you have an engineering department, you have a design and development process. The obvious output to your design and development process is some new product or service that has been developed that meets the needs of your customer, which would be the input. And again, we'll do a whole series of videos on process mapping, inputs, outputs, and it is honestly one of my favorite topics. Heck, we just released a podcast episode about a dessert that my wife makes for Christmas. And we use that to look at processes. So they really are critical to our everyday life, and especially in the world of quality management. Risk. We're getting in the R's. We're almost done, I promise. We're going to get to some more fun stuff than definitions, but it is, again, so critical to understand these terms. We have to have a common language to speak with. And these terms give us that common language to work with one another on. And to when we discuss these topics with others, we need to make sure that we're understanding it in the same manner. So risk is an effect of uncertainty. That's a little different than what a lot of folks think about with risk. They think of risk as it's something dangerous. It is something could go wrong. Not really. Risk is simply an effect of uncertainty. Those uncertainties can, in fact, be measured. And we'll do a whole other series on that as well. But you can measure that risk. What's the likelihood of it occurring? How frequently does it occur? What's the impact if it does occur? How difficult is it to detect? All of these things can have a huge impact on risk. So risk-based thinking has become a new buzzword in the ISO 9001 standard. I'll be honest, it's a hard term. There's lots of folks with harsh criticism over the incorporation of the idea of risk-based thinking. But the general idea behind it is that you consider risk, the effect of uncertainty, unintended consequences in your process integrations and in the development of your management system, and in how you intend to meet your customer requirements. Documented information is basically anything you write down. And we've got a whole slide dedicated to the differences in documents and records, so I won't go through this too much more. Quality planning, which we've already discussed. You do want to have a dedicated quality plan. And this is basically your specifications, what you're going to do, your procedures, how they're stored, where they're stored. Generally speaking, most of you are probably attacking your quality plan in your quality manual already and don't even know it. We've discussed customer satisfaction, and we will go into much more detail again through this course. But customer satisfaction can be measured in so many ways. So it depends on your target market, what makes a satisfied customer. So say something such as shopping online for Amazon. Well, they tell me I'm going to get it tomorrow. I want to get it tomorrow. They tell me I'm going to get it in 5 days. I want to get it in 5 days. They've got a good repeatable price. I know that if I go back 2 days later, it's going to be a similar price. These are all good things that add customer satisfaction. If I'm buying something that's, $10 and it's the Chinese knockoff version, I do have a certain expectation that it's not going to be as good as the more expensive American-made version. So these are things that go into customer satisfaction there as well. So think about this in your business with your customers who purchase from your organization. What are their expectations for quality and how can you measure it? Competence is effectively how well do you know how to do what you do? Now, competence can be measured through experience, through training, through certification, through on-the-job training, through all sorts of different expertise, but it is a measure and you get to define that measure of how well the person can do their job. Kind of going back to that same idea with quality I talked about. Know what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, how are you going to measure it? It's quality management. So we've also got the issue of monitoring and measuring. We've got a lot of stuff to look at. There's no shortage of things that we're monitoring and measuring in a quality management program. So we could be on the production floor out there with the caliper, torque wrench, whatever the tool is, and we've got very specific, very precise numbers we have to check, and they must be within this very narrow range, which we call a tolerance. On the other hand, we may be monitoring how many defects get reported. Defects get reported as a nonconformity. How many nonconformities are we getting? You might say, well, we only had 5 this month. That's great. I would argue if you only had 5 nonconformities this month, are people reporting when things happen? Or have they gone silent about reporting it? These are great things to monitor, great things to think about. If your team has quit reporting nonconformities, it could be that you're just outstanding and no one can find the problem. Hooray if it is. Oftentimes, we're not that good. So if people aren't reporting nonconformities, why is it? Is there a cultural issue going on that we need to address? Is there something deeper that we need to dig into? Perhaps they're not reporting them because they feel it's fruitless to report them because no one will do anything about it anyways. Why am I filling out this form again? I think we've all said that when we go into a doctor's office. You already have my information. Why am I filling it out again? So you don't want your employees to feel the same when they're reporting a nonconformity. It could be they're not reporting it and you're not getting an opportunity to monitor it and measure it because maybe they don't understand what's going to happen with it. Maybe they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble for reporting it. Lots of good things to look at there. I would encourage you to go to our website, texasqualityassurance.com, and look for something called the Good Catch Card. We've got a video on YouTube here about it as well. Great, great, great tool to make sure they're able to monitor and measure those. But just want to give you an example of how many different ways we can monitor and measure various processes in our organization. Audits. I know this is everyone's favorite word. Everyone loves to go through an audit, right? Right? Probably not. Okay. So usually get someone like me to come in and they're auditing you and they're going through this. And you ask yourself, well, really is an audit. So ISO defines, and there's a pretty good definition here, as a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining objective evidence. Very, very good keywords in this. This is not just fluff by any means. So it's systematic, meaning we have a predefined method we're going to use. So in the case of Texas Quality Assurance, we conduct process-based audits. It is an independent, documented process. That means that you can't audit something that you're responsible for. So if you're the engineer in charge of the design and development process, you don't get to audit anything in that process. Maybe you can go audit the suppliers and purchasing. Maybe someone in purchasing could come audit you, but you can't audit your own work. You also have to document what you found, what evidence did you have for that finding. If you found that what they were conforming, they had conformity to the process, why? What projects did you look at? What documents did you look at? If they were non-conforming, what did you look at? We have to have that objective evidence. Objective evidence can come in a variety of manners as well. So objective evidence can be records that we sampled, can be copies of processes or procedures, and it can be person-to-person interviews. So if you're talking with someone and they said, that can be objective evidence. Of course, it's not always the best objective evidence. You want to have something you can put your hands on, but it does work. course, with the audit, we've got our audit program, our scope, our audit plan, audit criteria. So audit criteria is what you're going to look at, what evidence you expect to get, what policies you're going to look at. Your audit plan it's a step-by-step, hour by hour. Who are you going to talk to? What are we looking at? Your audit scope. So the scope of your audit could be, we're going to look at the entirety of the quality management system. We're going to do this over the next 2 or 3 days. Maybe it's a 3-day audit. On the other hand, you may say, we're going to break our internal audit into smaller scopes. And so we're going to audit engineering this month. Then we're going to audit purchasing next month. Then we're going to audit the document control system itself the month after. All of these are acceptable, provided you have pre-planned for these types of audits. Of course, that provides us our audit evidence, which is our objective evidence. Any record statements, relevant information. We have our audit finding, conforming, non-conforming. I would urge when you're doing an audit to avoid the opportunity for improvement selection so often. I see too many times in audits where there are so many opportunities for improvement. You have to keep in mind that your role as an auditor is to find conformance, non-conformance. Your role as an auditor is not to consult. Then you're going to want to make sure that you've got an audit conclusion. What was your final assessment? Is this good? Is this bad? What do we think about it? How many findings did we have? How many majors, minors, so forth? And we've got our audit team. Oftentimes, audit team's a single person. But if you're doing your own internal audit of your own company, your audit team is going to have to be multiple people, because there's no single person in your organization who can be independent enough to audit the entirety of it. So we got to make sure we get the audit team noted. What are their competencies and so forth? So again, I know it's a lot of definitions. There is no shortage of it, but these are critical to building a management system. So, and yes, here in 40 minutes, I breezed through these, but do take time to go into the ISO 9000 and really study these words. Every single word is a gold mine. I swear to you it is. So do take some time to study and go through it. But here we've got something very important. We have documents versus records. What's the difference? Why do we care about a document versus a record? What identifies something as a document versus a record? Well, there's a lot of key details going on here. For one, anything you use as reference material is a document. So say this is an ASME code. That's a document. You must maintain that document. That document gets updated every so often. You have to maintain an updated version of that document. Your internal procedures that you reference, these are documents. Your weld specifications, these are documents. Your work instructions, if it is referenced for anything, it is a document. So this is the thing with documents. Documents have some very key requirements. They are generally what we call controlled. So if they're controlled, that means they have a version and they are approved. If they have a version and they're approved, they're a document. These have to be treated very differently. Whereas a record, on the other hand, it could be photographs from the production field, could be completing an inspection form, which is a document. But once it's completed and all the details are filled in, we now have a record. So records don't necessarily have to be controlled. You're probably not going to revise a record. You're going to create a new record. You're not going to revise one. But with your document information here, you are going to revise it from time to time, generally in response to nonconformities, corrective actions, and such. So during an audit, very, very critical to monitor the document control of an organization. Because if document control gets out of control, we're not maintaining the proper version, you have chaos and disorder. Everything we've talked about so far about the importance of definitions, just throw it all out the window if we're not maintaining our document control. Various ways it can be done, but document control is absolutely critical. And as a rule, If it's not a document, it's a record. So right here at the end, this is about the title slide of what we looked at. So we're here on our last leg. These are some of the key pieces of documentation that you're going to have in your quality management system. So we've got our policies, which we already talked about. These are top-level guidance documents. You as the new QHSE manager may actually write these documents for your organization, but be certain you have top management not only approval, but input and insight, and it really needs to be a guiding document for your organization. We have our manuals. Now, let me caution you on a manual. Your manual should not be 100 pages long. If your manual is 100 pages long, you need to break it out and make some separate procedures. We'll talk about procedures, but your manual is going to be an outline of the entirety of your management system. So be certain you treat your manual as a manual and not as a book of procedures. Simplest reason why is, let's say you have to change your supplier approval process. Now, you have one little section, a single paragraph out of 100 pages that needs to be revised. And now you need to retrain your team on this. Well, now you have to retrain everyone on that manual. Well, everyone has to be trained on the manual. So if you update it to Rev 2, how do you determine, well, we trained the purchasing department on Rev 2, but we didn't train anyone else on Rev 2. And now we're in your Rev 4, 5, and 6, where each one's a little different. It's confusion, it's chaos, it's disorder. Whereas on the other hand, if we have a purchasing procedure and the manual gives us our most basic requirements for developing a purchasing procedure, then we can just update the purchasing procedure. Kind of the same idea with the U.S. Constitution. It outlines the basic fundamental rules for how everything else is going to be run and organized. Don't violate the Constitution, write all the other procedures the same way. Your manual should be revered in the same manner in your organization. We don't change the manual unless we absolutely have to, and then we all agree that we made that change. Otherwise, we write tons of smaller process procedures. Process procedure can have the same problem, though, because that one process procedure, say it's a welding qualification. How many welding specs do you have in your organization? You really want to include all of those in a single procedure, or would you rather that procedure outline all of the other various work instructions for how you're going to perform these welding practices? So that's where we dig into our work instructions. So that's it on our basic terminology, kind of common ideas that are critical to quality management. So let's see here if we have anyone with any questions before we wrap this up. So I have my phone out here, which typically wouldn't do in a meeting or something, but want to make sure that I can review any questions or comments anyone has before we wrap up. Let's see here. We've got a couple in here that came in. So is best practice synonymous with requirement? That's a darn good question. That is a real good question. So requirement does include the generally implied, not my words, ISO's words. Generally implied can be a requirement. So yes, best practice can be synonymous with requirement. I would encourage you, though, let's go just a couple steps back. I would encourage you to document some of those best practices, whether it is in a single procedure, whether it's even in just a company newsletter that goes out. These are best practices. Let's get something that we can reference back to. But yeah, definitely counts. Would an auditor be concerned with internal outputs? Very good question as well. So let's see if we can have a good example here. So internal outputs. I'm going to go to design and development. So if we're looking at design and development has a few critical pieces to it. We've got the planning, we've got the execution of actually doing the work to design it. Usually more brainiac folks in the back working on things and testing stuff out. But then it has to go through a couple of phases at the end before we can complete it as being closed. So one of those phases is verification. Verification is where we check that design, that prototype, against our internal requirements. So we might have said we want to build, whatever. Here we've got a coffee cup, right? So we've got a coffee cup. Maybe we decided that we want to build this coffee cup with a certain dimension here. So we can check it. So that is an output from our internal process. Now, that's verification. We can verify, did we do what we set out to do? So yeah, definitely an internal output. And it is something that not only the auditor can check, but a good auditor will check. And I think that might be all the questions we had here. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So if you're enjoying this, other than maybe the first few minutes, me trying to struggle to get things figured out, it's the first time we've done this. So if you have any questions, please, leave them in the comments below. We will be checking those and replying and getting back to you on it. I want to let you know that we are going to be providing our QMS Bootcamp in full online for customers that are on our Quality Assurance Monthly program. So if you're in the Quality Assurance Monthly program, we're going to be getting the entirety of the QMS Bootcamp available to you online. Also, we do provide in-person courses, whether it's in person in this manner, over remote for your organization, or on-site in the conference room, whatever works these days in this COVID, post-COVID era that we're in. So we can conduct these trainings for you live and in person, and very much tailor and very much customize these courses to your organization, your people, your culture, your processes. So really, everyone, thank you for your time, your attention. I hope to take a look at the comments, see what else you have to say, and get back to doing what you do best.